We've all heard the saying about how at times we just look at the individual tree and fail to see the entire forest. I think that happens with us as we look at each Sunday's readings. We just tend to look at them as an individual tree. And we don't get, many times, the larger context of the flow of the readings from weekend to weekend, especially during times like Advent and Christmas and Lent and Easter. That there's a real thematic flow within the readings. And so 2 weeks ago, in the gospel, at the very end of it, we heard about this fig tree. And it's not doing well. And the owner of the garden says, get rid of it. Get rid of it. But the gardener says, well, hey, it's a young fig tree, and we all sort of know that it takes at least 3 years for a fig tree to produce fruit, and 7 years for it to really produce good fruit. So let's be patient with it. Let me, and as the gardener says, let me hoe around it and fertilize it. And bring some nurturement, some healing to it, versus uprooting it. And that word healing takes us to two of the words that are primary in the teaching and in mission of Jesus: healing and forgiveness. If you really look at the ministry of Jesus, those two words are constantly operative, constantly there. They're the entire farce. They're not just this individual tree. So this little fig tree is nurtured. And in a sense, it's forgiven for not bearing fruit yet. It's given more time. Last week, we had the story of the lost son. And technically, that's the name of the parable, even though we all know it as the parable of the prodigal son. You look in the New American Bible, the heading to it is not the prodigal son, but the lost son. The son who returns to homecoming. And what happens in that homecoming? Two things. What does the father do? He's watching. He's looking off in the distance. And he sees this figure coming towards him. He's wondering at first, who is that? And then he recognizes it. Recognized that person coming toward him as his son. And what does he do? He runs out. He runs out to this lost son. Tells the servants, bring the robe, bring the ring. What are those symbolic of? They're symbolic of reclaiming the lost son as his son. Reclaiming that sonship. Beginning to bring about healing. Healing of that relationship. And to continue that healing, what does the father do? He calls for a celebration. Kill the fatted calf. Bring everybody together. This son of mine who was lost has been found. Has been found. I forgive him. I forgive him for saying that I was dead. The healing, the forgiveness of that parable. So let's look at this one. the woman caught in adultery. By Mosaic law, she and the man should be stoned to death. The first question is, where's the guy? Where's the guy? That's the first question. Second question is, what is Jesus going to do with this? They're trying to trap him. Trying to trap him. But typical Jesus, he avoids the trap. And what does he say? He who is without sin casts the first stone. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. So then Jesus, as is typical in John's gospel, begins to have this dialogue with this woman who is fearful of being killed. She's there on her knees, hunched down. And he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Neither do I condemn you." Again, those words, healing and forgiveness. By saying he does not condemn her, he brings about a healing, a psychological healing, in that she now knows she will not be stoned to death. But then Jesus takes it, as he typically does, to the next level. Go and sin no more. Calls her to forgiveness, calls her to a different way of life. Those two words, healing and forgiveness. Those words are called to be operative in our lives. Those words are called to be part of our experience of God's healing and forgiveness. And those come to a culmination in terms of the ministry of Jesus on Holy Thursday and Good Friday. Jesus gives us the Eucharist. And one of the intents of the Eucharist is to bring about healing. Not physical healing, but spiritual healing. And every time we receive the Eucharist, that should be a reminder to us of the healing power of God in our lives. Good Friday, an incredible example of healing. Jesus dying on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins, giving his life that we might be a redeemed people. Healing and forgiveness. We are called to experience that in our lives. We're called to experience God's goodness, God's forgiveness, God's healing.